Well, the moment we have all been waiting for has finally come, and since I think we all want to maximize the time that we have with him, I will be brief in this introduction so that we can begin our conversation. As his biography subtitles, he is the man who started the computer revolution. He, as you all know, is the pioneer and co-founder of Apple, you know, that company, the largest company in the world, but most importantly, one that has changed the way we live, whereas I think our lives. So please.
El mejor del mundo. Sí, claro, estoy tremendo porque se me han terminado las preguntas y yo improvisando.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wozniak, for being with us here today. I want to talk to you about your story, about Steve Jobs, about Apple, but also about education, about the millennial generation, about the future. Let me just begin at the beginning with the Apple I and later the Apple II, which were probably one of the greatest inventions of the last century. You built both, you created both. How did you achieve the skills, the creative vision necessary to accomplish such a feat? What was the turning point, the reason why you wanted to build a machine that will eventually come to revolutionize the world we live in?
In all of my youth and upbringing, there was no chance that a person could get a computer of their own. They could own their own computer. It cost as much as a house, even when I was kind of older in high school, designing computers. So they were prestigious. It was so amazing to think what computers were. No other students in school did anything with computers. There were no books about them in bookstores. There were no magazines about computers. They were just big, huge, monstrous things that filled up rooms in huge companies. And somehow I discovered by accident learning a little bit of a journal here and a journal there. And I learned about binary arithmetic that computers use, and logic that make decisions, and registers and memories that can hold data. And I started sitting down on paper with a pencil, designing my own projects. So I got extremely skilled, and part of the reason I got skilled was there were no classes in the school. I was doing it all on my own. So after I finished a design, the first one took months, but I got to where I could eventually design any computer in 2 days. I would look at the newest building parts, and I would try to redesign computers I had designed from Hewlett-Packard, from Data General, from Digital Equipment Corporation, from IBM, from Varian Corporation. Tons of companies that were making computers. I liked to design them on paper. This was my passion in my heart. It was like I would prefer to do that than play card games or do crossword puzzles, but I was going to do it for my life. And I was going to own my own computer someday. I told that to my father, and he said it costs as much as a house. And I said, I'll live in an apartment. I was going to have my own computer. Eventually, I was so skilled at digital design. I mean, there was almost nobody like me in the world. Without a college degree, I was an engineer designing the hottest product of its day. The Hewlett-Packard handheld scientific calculators totally changed the world. Every engineer, every scientist in the world had to have one of these devices, and they cost about $2,000 of today's dollars. But within 5 years, the $10 slide rules were no longer being sold. They were gone. This calculator was so important. And I got to design this hot product, but on the side, I loved doing projects for other people. If somebody came to me and said they wanted to put movies in hotels, I would design it for them. And this was just my love. Well, by luck, at a certain point in time, I met Steve Jobs, of course. And he knew electronics, but he wasn't the Steve Jobs that we know back then. This was an early Steve Jobs. We would play pranks together, we'd listen to music, we'd go to concerts together. And about once a year, he'd come around and see the latest thing that I had built just for fun. Video games, terminals to talk to early networks. And he would come into town and see it, and he would always turn them into money, because Steve had zero money and he had to get money. And I had a job, so it was secondary to me. And once I was sitting in a club, and all of a sudden I saw the parts that summer, the summer of 1975, the parts came down in price. The brains of a computer, called a microprocessor, the memory of a computer, dynamic memory of a certain cost. All of a sudden, everything made a totally useful computer affordable. You could sit down, type in a program. I programmed at work at Hewlett-Packard, and I programmed programs to solve my engineering designs. I could now write my own programs and program them as long as my computer had enough memory, at least 4K bytes. It sounds tiny now. I saw that, but I saw that formula in my head in one night, and it didn't take long to go into work, design on paper, draft it up on a big drafting table, my design, and then I'd sit there and solder the wires every night. One person could build an incomplete computer on his own. And I didn't build the computer necessarily because I wanted a computer. That was one reason. But it was because the people in my club were talking about how once we all had our own computers, we would control our environment, we would be able to communicate with a lot of people quickly, we'd be able to educate better. These computers had so many uses in life, the social uses. I built the computer, and then I went down to the club. Steve Jobs wasn't even around, didn't even know it was happening, and I showed it off and I gave it away for free. Because I wanted these other people that believed in a computer revolution, that everyone was going to own their own computer someday. I wanted them all to be able to build their own computer for like $300. They could build my design. And that was the start. Steve Jobs came into town. I took him to the club. Don't believe a movie that shows him taking me to a club. I was a hero at the club showing off my computer every 2 weeks. And I brought him to show him what it was all about. And he didn't even have an idea to start a computer company. The myths of Steve Jobs are kind of enormous. No, he didn't want to start a computer company. He just wanted us to build one little part for $20 and sell it for $40 that would make it easier for people to build my computer, because we didn't even own it. And that was the start of Apple. Sort of a little period that's referred to as the garage, but we never had a company in a garage. That's another made-up story from an ad agency, but it was our representative place, but we didn't ever talk about a product in the garage. We didn't ever conceive of new projects in the garage. We didn't ever design anything in engineering on paper. We didn't ever do any building, prototyping of the products. We didn't do any manufacturing in the garage, and we didn't do any business in the garage. Steve Jobs did the business in his bedroom. On the phone, he would call for parts, and he would call for sales, and he would call to get publicity. But the garage was just sort of a place. We had a chair, and we had to use it about 1 day a week. We'd get a few computers that were manufactured somewhere else, test them out, and drive them to a store, and we'd get paid cash. But it was us. The garage was us. But you have a humble start. Whenever you start with no money at all, you kind of have to use what you have. You have to use your home. You have to figure out every way you can to save money on everything. So that was it. And then the Apple II. But the Apple I was not really designed as a computer. It told the world, here's the formula for the starting personal computer. The first computer that people could afford to buy should have a keyboard and a video screen, a television set, and it was affordable. Now the formula was out and everybody could build the computers. But the Apple II was but the Apple I had been modified from something I had before, modified quickly into being a computer, but it wasn't designed to be a great computer like the Apple II was. The Apple II was going to be, you'll see how revolutionary this was, when personal computers still did not exist. You could not go to a store, buy a computer, pull it out of a box, and run it. And even the Apple I's, once we shipped it, it was still like an IKEA of computers. You'd buy a board, and then you'd buy a keyboard, and you'd connect some wires and plug in a socket, and you'd buy some transformers and plug them in, and it was just a whole bunch of plug in this, plug in that, and now it works. You have to connect it together. The Apple II was going to be the first real personal computer. Now that we saw there was a start of a market, a few people, hobbyists, wanted to buy this machine, and we had to get money, and Steve Jobs was the businessman. He wanted this company so bad, he went out and found the money source. And it was an angel investor named Mike Markkula. Mike Markkula owned as much of Apple Computer as Steve Jobs and I did. Mike Markkula had he was experienced. Steve and I were in our young 20s. No money, no business experience at all. Mike Markkula had all the money, the experience, the know-how, and he would run marketing in our company, taught us how important marketing was, especially communicated concepts of marketing to Steve Jobs, and he told us, here are the people you hire to have a technology company, and here's what their roles and responsibilities are. This is how you interview them. So he really is the person that created Apple more than us, but it was a better story, 2 kids in a garage.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of a myth, yeah.
You mentioned Steve Jobs quite a few times. How was the relationship so good, you two being so different? What were the key issues that made you work so fantastically
Steve and I were very,
well?
very similar. We had a lot of similar ideas about the world and social and what's right and wrong and music, and important things in life are worth a lot more than just floaty, fun little entertainment things. And we shared a lot of that before Apple started. But once Apple started with money to invest in the Apple II computer, the Apple II computer was so great because video games in the arcades were only black and white. And I had designed some of them for Atari. Oh my gosh, this Apple II computer was color. Nobody ever expected color in a low-cost computer because color generally cost $1,000 to create, and I figured out a way to do it for $1. Something in no engineering book, totally different definition of color television, but I knew why it would work engineering-wise. And also, video games up until then in the arcades were hardware designs. You had to connect chips with wires, signals that went up and down, and caused paddles and balls to show up on a TV set. It took 6 months to design a hardware game. It was not software. They were not programs like today. The Apple II was the first time ever that true arcade games in color was enough, but they were programmable. Not only programmable, but programmable in a simple computer language that I wrote called BASIC, that young children, 10-year-old children, could sit down and write programs that made things move on a screen. This was a turning point in history. Games were going to be the center of the first home computer sales. People would want them because you could sit down and program things yourself that moved on a screen. So the Apple II was incredible. We showed the Apple II, demonstrated it, before we ever shipped an Apple I computer. So we knew the Apple I was going to be very short term. It wasn't a good computer. The Apple II was the one that was going to make the whole industry go and make a huge company. And that's when we raised the money. Once we got the money, Steve Jobs' personality changed because he was now founder of a company that had a lot of money invested, millions of dollars today, a lot of money. And being a founder, he had no business experience. He had no executive title, but he would just sort of work and put everybody that was doing anything, he would talk to them and try to find out why they were doing this and why don't you do it this other way. He would learn how to run a company. That was his role. That was what he wanted in life. He wanted to be the important Mr. Big on top of everything guy. And I don't like politics. I don't like people, trying to jab everybody and outdo them and be above them. So I would run engineering. Nobody could ever kick me out of engineering. I'm too good at it. So I did engineering as we had to keep coming up with attachments from our computer to printers, to modems, to eventually disk drives, floppy disk drives. So that was my role. And we became kind of two different people. I'm doing engineering. Steve's going to do the business. And I want to disdain the business. My personal ethics are way too high usually for business ethics are a little different. The business always comes first. So we stayed apart from then on. We were so we weren't close friends going to every lunch together from then on. That's right. But we were friends. Yeah. And of course we participated in running the company. There were 5 of us that ran the company for the first few years.
I said at the beginning I wanted to talk about education. You said you always wanted to be an engineer, but I also read that you also wanted to be a teacher. Would you agree with me that paraphrasing Nelson Mandela, education is still the most powerful weapon with which to change the world? How do you think we should adapt our education, how we should be teaching the new generation of millennials in order to foster this environment conducive to that creative thinking that made you...
Personal computers have been really interesting regarding education, especially primary education and university education, because look how many companies started with people that didn't have a college degree, that left college because they sensed this industry, they wanted to do something important in life. You get educated everywhere you go. You get educated in the classroom academically, you get educated on the street, you get educated talking to friends, thinking up ideas. If you're a builder, you get educated by the devices you build. So you get education a lot of different ways. And one of the things is primary education, middle school, high school, they tend not to treat things like technology as important to teach. Somehow it's not considered increasing your brain ability. Increasing your brain is learning all of the dates and historical events of the world and things like this, things that we know how to teach easier, but technology is like vocational subject. It's like learning how to repair cars, so it's not taught very much in the schools directly. At the university level, you have a very unique situation. You generally have to learn the same sort of materials as everyone else the first couple of years in the university, but by your third year, you can go off and shoot and take the courses you want to take and go in your own direction very much. For me, I loved computers. By my third year of college, I only took graduate courses in computer design, hardware design, and software design. And I would buy the books before the class started, and I loved it so much. I'd read the books, answering every question, learning as much as I could, and I would be halfway through the book by the time class started on Monday. Why? Loved it. It was passion. Follow your passion. So the key thing about education is follow your passion. But a lot of times in primary education, I wanted to be a teacher of young students all my life. And I eventually did. Secretly, I went and I taught fifth graders, 10-year-old kids, for 8 years. I was even teaching up to 7 days a week. So I wanted to do this. But the thing is, in primary education, you get taught the right answers are the same answers as in the book that everybody else has. And if you think for yourself and come out with a lot of different answers and strange questions like young people do, you're disruptive. You don't get a good grade. You don't get called intelligent. And yet you might be the most thinking person of the batch. So that's one problem we have in schools, and it's due to money. You have to have one teacher and 30 students. And that's a problem with schools today. And second of all, schools don't have as much money as they should have because students do not get to vote, and votes turn into money in a democracy. So a family of 5 has no more say over school monies than a family of 2.
Yeah, I've heard you say somewhere that eventually we will come to a world where robots will be teaching students on a one-to-one
basis. I had hoped that when computers came into our schools, wow, computer has a whole class on math statistics. A computer has a whole class on geometry. A computer has a whole class on history of World War II. And the students, oh my gosh, one low-cost computer per student. All the students can sit there learning forever. And first of all, the school systems don't really want the teacher to be in control. Second, young students want human guidance. They need a human feeling telling me what to go. Here's what you should be doing. They don't sit down on their own. Not very many of them are self-directed. I was one of those. Very independent, self-directed, not socialized with other people. I would just learn on my own anywhere I could, any book I could find. But a lot of people just want to, oh my gosh, somebody show me what to do. What are the chapters? What pages do I have to read today? And that fights the person that loves a subject and wants to get ahead and advance in the class because they have to do all the other subjects at the same time. And I'm thinking, when I did my teaching for 8 years, I found that one-on-one, if you have a good teacher who cares, you can never fail. You'll always be sensitive to what your student is maybe missing that's important, and explain it to them, and they got it wrong, they don't quite know it. You'll make sure every single student learns at A+ level. If you have a few students, you can do pretty well. And I found I could even teach 17 students very well. But when I had 30 students, some of them would not be paying attention, they'd be doing other things. Class size, to me, was the most important thing in how good an education is. That doesn't necessarily apply by the time you're at the university level. You're old enough and you can find a lot of ways to learn. But at primary education, class size is the most important thing. And I came from the state of California. The state of California, of the 50 states, is 50th in order of class size. In other words, we have the most students per teacher, far from Mississippi. It has to do with some laws that limit the money in California for schools.
I see. Talking about how you designed single-handedly the first 2 computers sold by Apple, today some of the most powerful inventions are created through collaborative or collective intelligence. In this sense, do you think the world of creative thinking and executing has changed from the one in which you created your computers? Or let me put it another way, would you have approached the process differently today as you did on those days?
Okay. Before myself and the Apple I, the Apple II computers were huge pieces of equipment, large mechanical packaging that they were in. It took teams of maybe a dozen or more engineers to design any computer. Even the smallest computers needed large teams of people. For some reason, at one point in time, one person could do the entire design of the computer, all of the circuitry, the analog, the digital, the memories, everything in it, the display, the input and the output. One person could do it. But then after Apple started, the industry became so huge in dollars, so huge in industry that now every single computer we had to invest a lot of money in a large team trying to create the same thing. I had huge advantages designing on my own because I didn't have to get everything approved by every committee. I didn't have to design one part of it to interface with another part of it according to a standard. I just got to condense the whole thing into one mind. It's the very easiest, fastest way to design in the world when you have that available, so I could be very creative. And I just had ideas for goals, and I knew I was very skilled at the steps to reach those goals. Nowadays, it got to a point in time in Apple, not too long after that, we were so successful, now we had managers, and the managers had teams of engineers and software and hardware, and the software and hardware groups would have to prepare documents in advance for a new project, 40 pages describing exactly how it would work and every little tiny structured detail of it. And then if I'm an inventor, I want to go in the laboratory, put something together and think, oh my gosh, if I added this other little part, I would get so much more benefit, or here's a clever way on the circuit I could take something out. Those freedoms were lost. The freedom of invention was kind of lost. You had to define the project and know it in advance, and it was kind of not my style of invention. It was more like engineering. And that's what happens. But when you have several teams that work together, communication between groups is so complicated. Look at it now between yourself and your phone that is manufactured by one company, an app that's made by a third company, and is dealing with networks, maybe cellular, that's another company yet. And if something goes wrong, it's almost impossible to fix it or find the solutions now. So, two people talking to each other is a bad enough problem, but especially 3 to 4 to 5 groups getting everything to work right is very difficult, and it's more costly to design, takes longer, yeah. So it fights creativity. When you can sit down alone and do a lot of the disciplines yourself, and even if you don't know them, if you're smart enough, you'll learn them. Learn the disciplines you need. Go as far as you can with the resources you have.
We have begun to receive a few questions from the social networks, and that means that you can also start thinking about the questions you would like to ask. Cualquier pregunta que queráis hacer, levantad la mano y os tomaremos nota para que podáis hacerla aquí en directo. Let me ask you, I have 3 questions that have been given through the networks. The first one is asking, what does the education system, what is it missing so that it will really foster entrepreneurship?
Yes, the education system is missing a goal-oriented approach. Here's a high goal, and we will give you the steps of learning and books and materials that you can learn from to reach that goal. And if you want, go out on the internet and do it. One of the key things is, why don't we take students at a younger age, and when they indicate they have an interest in life, try to expose them to everything. Make sure they get exposed to technology and computers so they could choose that. But whatever they're interested in, let them go as fast and as far as they want to. Here's the problem. If you let everyone go in their own direction, you'd have to have 8 teachers in a class, experts in literature and writing and sociology and psychology and mathematics and physics and chemistry. You'd have to have an expert teacher that was also good enough at taking them from a young level up to a college level. This is just like impossible. What if a computer could be that person someday? Our devices are getting more and more like people. They're like friends. Hold out the smartphone, talk to it, ask it questions, and it's becoming like so friendly, and the brain waves are getting very much like when you're falling in love. What if this could be a human being someday? It's not quite yet. It doesn't quite have feelings. It doesn't have consciousness, but what if it ever got to that point? That could be your teacher. It would know your heart and soul better than humans, and you would, as a young student, you would follow it. Now, here's what we can do. You would have look how low cost a smartphone is, or a tablet. I bought a lot of Android tablets for under $50, okay? You could have an Android tablet sitting there for every single student has his own best friend guiding him. Every student can go in their own directions as fast as they want, and they can skip the things that they don't like in life. It doesn't fit today's school thinking and academic thinking. It's not the way things were in the past. That's what thinking differently out of the box is all about. That's what disruption's all about. It said we didn't really need schools to be this way. The only reason they're this way is it's all that teachers know how to teach.
There is a question related to something you just said before, is whether you think that technology has completely redefined human interaction.
I look at my own life, and almost everything I do in life, I'm using technology for. I think, how did I used to do this in the past? Either A, I could not possibly have done the same job. I mean, right now, Google searches. I mean, you'd have to go to a library and search through a lot of books, and you may not even find as much information as you can get in one quick Google search. But almost everything, especially from the third-party apps that are out there. And when you look at things like looking up movie theater timings, getting airplane reservations, getting all the notifications about when things are moved, traffic, navigation. We've got Uber now and Airbnb, all these people sharing, the sharing economy. These things, how did they get replaced? And yet they're such an important part of our life. Absolutely. So I'm very thankful to the third-party app stores that allow everybody in the world that has a brain and wants to create something different for people to live their life a little better, they have a way to get it done. And it's really odd, but when we introduced the first iPhone at Apple, we didn't even really have that vision. We had a vision that you could get the weather and the stock reports, and you could, of course, communicate. And that was pretty much the extent of it. You will stick with Apple's apps. The third-party app store let the world go off in so many directions no one could have thought of in advance. The great disruptive technologies, when you look back, when they were happening, nobody saw that they were going to be important. Personal computers, when we started Apple, big companies were just saying it was just going to be a tiny little thing for hobbyists who want to spend a lot of money, $2,000 for a typewriter because they're geeks. It was going to be a tiny little thing, and Facebook. It was hard to say, will Facebook really take over the whole world, These things are just, you don't see it until it happens, and it's too late. And the reason is, if you could see it in advance, all the biggest companies in the world with their billions of dollars would sit there and go in that direction ahead of everyone else. The big companies, when we started Apple, the big computer companies said, it's not going to be worth anything, we don't want to do it. These little personal computers, they can't do enough.
Question. I'm translating as I read, so forgive me if I don't go exactly, but they're asking what's the difference between a revolutionary genius and a man with good big ideas that do not actually come to reality?
Well, the person who gets acknowledged as a revolutionary genius or as a creative person is the person who builds something that in the end not is just artistically different and very out-of-the-box thinking, but actually solves a problem for a reasonable price, and people actually use it. Then you call it successful creativity. You call the person creative after they have something that is sold. So you really need the business end of it. If you don't have the business, just being a creative artist who thinks differently isn't enough.
Si hay alguna pregunta que queráis trasladarle, yo intentaré traducir to the best of my abilities. I'll try to translate, or you can ask in English. Feel free to raise your hand, yes. Y por ahí luego, por favor.
Hi, hello. You haven't said anything in Spanish, and you speak Spanish very well. I know that because you visited Mexico 2 years ago. Apple started innovation with technology. If you have to start a new company today, where will you start?
A new company today. Well, I go back and I think, first of all, myself. What would I be interested in if I were one of the young kids today? And I believe I still would have had an affinity for technology. And today it's little boards like the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino board. Small boards you can buy for very little money, connect a keyboard and write programs on them, run wires over to things like motors and make little tiny robots. I'd probably be playing with those when I was young. And in an older phase, by the university level, I'd be thinking in terms of probably artificial intelligence. Our computer equipment's over the time since all the time from the start of personal computers until today, every advance made the computer act more like people. In other words, I don't have to think to I just ask my phone a question, what is the tallest mountain in Spain? And I get an answer. It's like I didn't have to think about procedures anymore. It operates in the human way. We were taught a long time ago by a person that joined Apple that you put a lot of work into the technology to make it work in familiar human patterns. That makes it easy. Ease of use is something Apple got a good reputation for our whole lives. If you make all the technology there, but the person has to think and learn new ways to use it and type in commands that they've memorized words of. You've now forced the human to learn to use the technology, and that means that the technology is the master. The technology is more important. We at Apple feel the human is more important. We always have, and we should make things just work like a human. Now, if I can just speak my voice and get an answer back in voice, it's just like I'm talking to a real human being. It's going to go more like that, and that's called artificial intelligence. Will these machines get to the point that the two of us up here on this stage would be robots, and you can't tell the difference? We'd be just like we are now. They'd have feelings, they'd have consciousness. Is that going to happen? And I believe there's a very good chance it can happen unless technology gets stalled and can't advance there. It should happen by, within 20 years.
We have 2 questions there, then later here, and while you get the microphone, I'm gonna ask you one that we received from the networks. Do you have any advice to the young people who are thinking about launching a company?
Young people launching companies are the dearest people to my heart. I have always cared so much about the younger people, and I had 3 kids of my own. But I go back to my years in high school and in the universities, and I had so much learning I got to do. I could go to bookstores and see computer manuals you could never find. The college bookstore would have classes on computers, even though they were graduate classes. When I went to college, Introduction to Computers was a graduate course. That's how far away it was. But I could buy manuals and learn what I wanted to learn. And my mind, everything that I was going to become in life and become good at, took off in those years. So I care very much about young people that are learning skills. Secondarily, it's so important to have a business. What I did was I was a great designer, but it takes more than a design to make a computer. It takes a product. Steve Jobs, my best friend in business, would take my designs and turn them into products. Boxing, plastic cases, all the things that needed shipping, agreements on buying parts and agreements on sales and all that stuff. So you need a business. What I like to advise young people is, if you want to have some success someday in life, first of all, try to go as far as you can with your ideas, spending almost no money. Very little money. Develop it as far. Try to get to a working prototype, even if it's just a virtual screen that simulates what it's going to be, that somebody could sit down, use their muscles and point and make decisions and try your product out before you go to raise money. You'll get a lot more money and you'll have a lot better story to tell if you get that far. Don't just write down the first little ideas of something good on paper. Secondly, you better have a good technical person helping you out with the ideas for your product. Somebody who's used to solving problems and building things and making things work from scratch. And I don't know how you find this person. It's almost like luck. You got to run in and know the right ones. But you got to have a strong technical person that can build it, a strong businessman that wants to make a business so you can have a successful product that will sell. You're not worth anything unless you make money. If it's worth it to people, they'll pay for it and you'll make money if you're doing something good for society. Secondly, the last important thing, you better have some really good marketing. And that doesn't mean using your own head and surmising. People will want this product because it works a certain way. You yourself or one of your team had better want to have that product for themselves. And they had better want it to be so perfect and good and not clumsy that they would use it and they would have no choice but to buy it. And that's hard to come by, but that you got to have a user of the product, a businessman, and an engineer. And they could be in one person. They could be in 2 people, they could be in 3 people or more. And that's the starting point. Eventually you're going to need people that know how to build things, operations, you're going to need accounting and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I believe there were 2 questions over there. I don't know if you have the microphone.
Hi.
Yeah.
What do you think is the reason behind the lack of women in engineering?
The lack of women in engineering is kind of, it's cultural. In the United States, it's never been, ever, long before computers came around, technology and sciences, it was a low percentage of women that went in that direction. Sure, in school they're just as smart and do just as well academically and get the grades and learning things, but it comes to like having companies and all that, why don't they pop up? When I went back to school to get my degree, after Apple was successful, I thought if Apple had never happened, I would have finished my college degree. So I went back to Berkeley under a fake name, Rocky Raccoon Clark. And that's what it says on my Berkeley diploma. And I noticed that in the computer science courses, 75% of the students were from Asia, the brainiac countries, you know. Silicon Valley to this day now is one of 10 counties in the United States where more than half the people speak non-English at work. They've all immigrated. But they were Asians, and of the Caucasians, maybe 90% were male, and of the Asians, 50% were male, 50% female. So the culture goes a lot deeper than you know, it's unexplainable. In my own teaching classes, I taught girls had learned just as quick, had the answers to the questions. They knew where data packets were flowing on networks, all this stuff. And by the time they got to 7th grade, you know, 11, 12 years old, the sociality of schools, even when they knew the answers, they wouldn't raise their hand as much. There was something that's not in control of a parent or a teacher to encourage them. It's just like their friends become more important, maybe. That's the best guess I can make. No answers, obviously. We certainly, almost every big technology company that's successful, like Google and Apple, Microsoft, is going out of their way to try to hire as many women as they can, as far as including ethnic minorities. Yeah, it's very desirable to get them in and have the mix and the flow. And certainly we've seen women running big companies.
Hi, Steve. This is Andreu, an internet research scholar at Stanford, your neighbor for 6 years in Los Gatos. I would like to ask you today, if you had a magic wand, only with 3 steps, how would you enhance education?
A magic wand?
You could make 3 decisions, big decisions worldwide.
Enhance innovation?
No, education.
Education. One is, I would have computers that were like people. I would have very small, very tiny classes, especially before 8 years old, and I would not have testing until very late in life, if at all in schools. I would skip tests, because here's one problem. You're in school and you're young, and you notice that at age 8, right away, there's about 4 students in the class that always have the answers. And you're not one of the quick ones to have the answers, so you start to think school's not important. The things you are not good at become unimportant. So first of all, I would try to make school important to everybody, whatever social steps it takes. I would let teachers teach well. That's another one. Teachers can teach well. They'll make sure that the students in their class learn this material well, and if they don't learn it well in one day, they will repeat that day, and they'll go back and forth, and they'll take as long as it takes to teach well. Right now, the teachers have contracts with a principal in a school that they have to do certain pages in the book on Monday, certain pages on Tuesday, certain on Wednesday, and if the teacher doesn't make those goals, the teacher will get fired. So that's a problem with our thinking about, shouldn't education be to learn and not just to get through things? And I also think that students should be allowed to go as fast as they want to and what they want to, and not have to pay attention to the stuff that just doesn't appeal to them. They're not interested in. Some people love to write, they love to read, they love history, they love physics, and some of them love mathematics and you know and all the sciences. Let them choose at an earlier age rather than 3rd year of college what their major is.
Our rector wants to ask a question too.
Sure.
Mr. Wozniak, thank you so much for this great presentation. I was wondering if you want to share a big learning as a consequence of a very big mistake.
A big learning from a big mistake. Almost everybody likes to talk about the big mistakes that got them places, and I am the worst person to ask, because most people are interested in how we started Apple, and back in those days, anything that came my way, I was just a genius, and I attacked problems. I attacked a few that should have been impossible. I described one, color. I took a number. In color, I took a number like 6, and it stands for red. Well, in the old ways, you would take this number 6, and you'd send it over to another device that knows how to convert 6 into red, how to make red at that place on a TV set. Somehow, I figured out that the number 6 itself was red. If you sent the number 6 right into the television set, in binary, 6 is 0110. 0110 is 6. If you sent 0110 over and over into a TV, it would show up as red. Don't ask me how I think of these ideas. And I forget what your question was, but it was I got off
failure.
Track.
She was asking.
Failure. So here's the problem. I didn't have any failures. Every single thing I attempted. There was a stalling point when I created a floppy disk, having never done disk hardware or software in my life. Created one that was so unusual, so few parts and so few at cost compared to any ever done before, and I thought I'd left something out. But there was one part in it where I could write ones and zeros on a disk, just like you were writing it on a magnetic tape, and I could read back the ones and zeros, but I wouldn't ever know where do the bytes start and end. You have no idea where the bytes start and stop. It's a horrible problem. And then I found a method and overcame it. I was afraid I wouldn't solve it, but maybe I would. And when I got there, I put things off until I get there. So I didn't really have those failures and successes in that time frame at all. In a later point in time, I had startup companies, and I would try to do extreme things. I succeeded very well with a remote control, but then I tried to build a GPS device. Tiny, low-cost device. You put a battery in it, and it lasts for a year, like our Hewlett-Packard calculators. And I failed at the battery life, the size, and the cost. And I took on some possible goals. I came up with some very clever engineering ideas, but it didn't solve the problem. Some things actually are impossible. And I still think every night, almost falling asleep, I still try to think, is there a way? What steps need to happen in the technology of radios and low cost and low power that could make that device possible? I still devote myself to it.
Thank you so much. The mistake is a good way to learn, obviously.
Yes, and by the way, all my projects that I built for fun in my life, they had no business potential, no money potential, except a lot of them Steve Jobs found the money for. But I developed them not for myself to build a company, but each one of them I learned. I was better at designing the next one, faster and faster, clever ideas, ways to reduce cost and parts. I got better and better. You could call those failures, but they weren't, really. But it was the steps to get to the home run, which was the Apple II computer.
Hi, I would like to have your recommendations for IT companies, how to attract and more to attract, even to engage talent like people like yours.
The talents I had back in the old days, and I was shy, would have been impossible to find. How do you find Steve Wozniak out of the batch? Now, my company, Hewlett-Packard, found me. I had no college degree in engineering. They were making the hottest technology product of its day, the handheld scientific calculator that every engineer and scientist would have to have in a few years, and it cost a huge amount of money. And they brought me in for an interview. They heard that I could design anything. I don't know where they heard it. They brought me in for an interview. It was from a friend of mine. They brought me in and interviewed me and hired me on the spot. So they found me. They found a guy that is a builder. Look at somebody who has built projects and can show you, here's what I did, maybe in their home. I did this, I hooked this up this way, and I got this motor to work, and I got this working on a program that I wrote on my little TV set, and I did it all myself. Look for those people that are the real builders and creators that start out with an idea and turn it into something, and they don't just look at a book and say, I'll build something in a book. That's what you would get in school. That's not the sort of learning you're looking for.
Okay, well, they're telling me that time is out, that we should be closing our conversation. I cannot be thankful enough to you. Thank you so much for sharing with us this very important day. I've been telling you that for us it's a very, very important day, and that we couldn't do this without you. So again, thank you for sharing. Thank you for letting us learn from you directly, and we hope to see you back very soon. Thank you so much.
Very good to be here at this all-important place.
Bueno, impresionante, ¿no? ¿Os ha gustado?